in the air for you and me. Radioactivity discovered by Madame Curie. Radioactivity tune into the melody. Radioactivity.
Here in the heart of Hollywood, California is the Aetherius Society. The Aetherius Society believes all these things and more. Founded by Englishman Sir George King in the 1950s, the Aetherius Society is a gathering of people, a church if you will, from all walks of life, from teachers to doctors, from housewives to PhDs. Meet Ray Nielsen and Alan Mosley, Aetherius Society priests for over 25 years.
Can you tell us a little about how the battery works?
I'm glad that you've asked about the battery. What kind of a battery are we talking about? Well, the principle of any battery is to store energy. Now, prayer energy, because it operates on a higher frequency, it's a higher vibrational, it's still an energy. It's still something which we call spiritual power. And its basic operation is to put prayer energy into a battery, a physical container, which can be released at a later time, which can help in many different types of situations. Here we have prayer, a beautiful power, a fantastic light that can leave people's hearts, stored in the battery, and then compressed because it's stored more and more and more, and it may take 3 or 4 months for people to charge a battery, and it can be released in 1 or 2 hours.
What we're doing is, instead of having each person saying a prayer at different times, like dots of rain scattered all over the place, everybody's praying together. It's being put in a battery. You have hundreds of hours of this beautiful prayer, and it's all the same, and it's there in one spot.
Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, let it drop. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani.
The battery has an opening. You'll see the lid will be removed both prior to the session and put back after each session to prevent anything else from going into the battery. We want the purest energy possible. There's a slight indentation there, and the hand will go up as close to the battery opening as possible. At the back of the battery you will see a contact. That's so the battery can be put on a special machine and the energy drawn out of it at a later time and sent to where it's needed the most.
Perhaps the most controversial aspect of the Aetherius Society is its unwavering belief in space intelligences. They believe that UFOs visit man regularly to give him instructions on everything from nuclear proliferation to cooperation between nations and peoples. Yearly, members of the Aetherius Society take a special trek up the slopes of nearby Mount Baldy to pray for mankind and to release the stored power from the prayer battery and possibly commune with alien intelligences.
Driving here this morning in the car with Raymond on the way to the pilgrimage, I had a fantastic, well, I think it was a UFO sighting. It was in the southwest corner of the sky, and it was a large globe, disc-shaped object, which seemed to be metallic, and it seemed to glow And then all of a sudden I was looking at it, I thought, I wonder if it's a plane, and then it just blinked out. And a couple of minutes later, a plane actually passed, which was nothing like this, you know. So I can only think it was a flying saucer. And it was actually confirmed by a colleague of mine, Wajid, who's in a separate car.
I was driving in a separate car, and as Chrissy said, lo and behold, out in the sky was a metallic shaped object, and it kind of suddenly shone a little bit and then just disappeared.
These intelligences will, at the right time, come more openly amongst mankind and help to teach and guide him. They have said that they are helping this earth in a specified plan, and that they will be far more open than they have ever been before in the future. So the whole subject is not getting less important, it's getting more important. The beings are humanoid in appearance. They're not bug-eyed little green monsters or you know, stick men, whatever. They are from this solar system. I know some people will say, well, life can't exist as we know it on other planets. Well, it's not life as we know it. It's life a lot more advanced than mankind on Earth, but it has the same structure. Its potential is far greater. One of the contacts from the planet Venus, the Master Aetherius, from which the Society takes its name, he's over 3,500 years old in the same physical structure. And he has said that anything that they are capable of, we too have that capacity and that capability which we will develop in the future.
People are going to think you're crazy, won't they?
Let me answer that.
Go.
If people want to know whether we're crazy or not, they only have to do one thing. They have to investigate us. They have to find out for themselves. And that's what we ask. We don't say believe us straight away. We say find out what we're about, and you too will come to some amazing conclusions that you just can't dismiss the Aetherius Society or the cosmic contacts of Sir George King.
Round, round, get around, I get around, yeah, get around, round, round, I get around.
If you're having trouble getting around, you need a Hover-Round power chair. I'm Tom Cruise, inventor of the Hover-Round. I'm a nurse by profession, so I know how important it is to your well-being to have a power chair that gives you independence and freedom. The freedom to get around and enjoy life again.
My Hover-Round has changed everything.
We say that Hover-Rounds are round for a reason, because unlike chairs with a square front, your Hover-Round allows you to maneuver easily, whether you're indoors or out. That's why I urge you to call us to find out how you can get a Hover-Round in your home.
I feel very safe because of the maneuverability.
Hover-Round also gives you freedom from pain. Our custom-fitted seats are designed to give you total support and comfort all day long. They're fully loaded with our exclusive pressure release system, featuring lumbar support, orange stick foam, and Comfort Ride inner spring.
It's a great ride, and it didn't cost me a penny.
9 out of 10 people got their Hover-Rounds for little or no cost last year. You'll get a team of Hover-Round specialists who will help you every step of the way.
I can't recommend it strongly enough. Hover-Round will make a big difference in the quality of your life.
Call right now and find out how you can get a Hover-Round in your home. There's no cost, no obligation. We'll also send you a free information kit featuring a free video that shows you how Hover-Round can help you enjoy an active life again. Plus, you'll get a certificate for a free in-home test drive. You owe it to yourself to discover what thousands of Hover-Round owners are singing about.
With a special training in Jungian psychology.
Sector 6 reporting. From orbital section number 2. Relationship Mars
subject demand the truth.
Good evening. You've been listening to a recording of the voice of Mr. King, who is a chairman of the Aetherius Society. The recording was made while Mr. King was in a trance state and was transmitting, he believes, the intelligence of a person called Mars Sector 6. Mr. King is going to discuss his views, his experiences, and give us some of what he regards as the evidence in support of them this evening. We have also with us in the studio two scientific colleagues of mine, both to listen to and then discuss this evidence together. The first is Dr. Dewhurst, who is an astronomer from the Cambridge Observatories, and the second is a psychiatric colleague who, under the present regulations constantly criticized of our profession, will, like myself, be anonymous. He is a psychiatrist with a special training in Jungian psychology. Now, Mr. King is in the studio with us to discuss at first hand both his work in trance, his knowledge and belief about the matters dealing with space and the people who inhabit it. Mr. King, how long has the Aetherius Society been in existence?
3 years now.
You're its founder chairman?
That's correct, yes.
Before you founded the Aetherius Society, what was your occupation?
I was a taxi driver.
I see. How old are you now?
40.
So you founded it when you were 37?
Yes, that's right. You see, I had quite an amazing experience one Saturday morning while I was washing up some dishes. I had a voice, quite definitely a voice out of this world, say to me, "Prepare yourself, you are to become the voice of interplanetary parliament." Soon after this, I had a physical visitation from a member of the cosmic hierarchy, if you like, who gave me certain instructions. I obeyed these instructions to the letter, and later on I found I could contact intelligences from other planets.
This visitation that you described, what happened?
Well, it was quite physical. I was sat in a room and a man walked through a locked door across the carpet on the floor, and he was quite physical. When he crossed the boards, they creaked, and he sat down opposite to me and began to talk to me.
I see. He had a body and a face just like anybody else?
He was as physical as you are now.
Where did he in fact come from?
He is a man who is living in northern India at the moment, but he came from another planet, I believe it was Venus.
Now, when he came into your room through the locked door with this ordinary physical body, did he resemble any other human inhabitant of this planet, or?
Yes, he would have been taken for an Indian, I think.
I see. And this was the body which he has when he's on Venus as well?
No, this was a special body he used when he was on this Earth.
What happens to it when he's not here?
I think he is capable of breaking up the atomic structure and cellular structure and reforming another body when he goes back to Venus again.
Now, he gave you some instructions which you followed. Could you describe them?
I'm sorry I couldn't.
I see. But as a result of those, you became a channel for the transmission of messages from cosmic intelligence.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
You have a title which you've been given in this respect.
Yes, the space people refer to me as Mental Channel Number 1.
And they send their messages directly through you as a rule?
They do, yes. I think I've received more messages from the space people than any other person on Earth at the moment.
Yes. It's quite fitting under those circumstances that you should have founded the society. You did this for what purpose?
Well, I wanted to make known this great truth that I was receiving. I wanted all the world to know about it, so I founded the Aetherius Society so that this could be brought about.
Now, in addition to the messages which you receive in a trance state, do you receive visitors from outer space in person?
I have met people from outer space.
You've met people from Saturn?
I've met people from Saturn, Mars and Venus, yes.
Tell me what someone from Saturn looks like.
Well, the particular person I met was a man. He was average height, dark hair, fairly broadish. He had no pupils to the eyes, very, very large hands, but very, very small feet.
Now this body that you describe and this person, does he have a physical existence only when he's on Earth, or are the physical existences on Saturn, for example?
No, he lives in a physical body on Saturn, but it's a little bit different than the one I've described to you.
I see. When he's on the Earth, he breathes the air like we do?
Yes, and he eats the same as you do.
And, I mean, could he swim in the sea and things like that?
Yes, except he wouldn't eat meat.
He wouldn't eat meat?
No.
But when he's on Saturn, he has a physical body, not quite the same?
Yes, quite so.
The same thing applies to people from Venus?
To people from Venus and Mars and all the other planets.
Now, when they come to visit you, when they come to visit the Earth, how do they get here?
They come to Earth in the vehicles that we refer to as flying saucers.
You've seen one of these, have you?
Oh, I've seen a couple of hundred, I suppose.
Close up?
Quite close, yes, some of them.
What do they look like?
Well, they look rather like two saucers put together with a dome on the top, and they have portholes, and when you see them at night, they glow a golden color.
What are they made of?
A metal which is maybe described, I think, as organic metal.
What does organic metal mean? I'm sorry.
Well, it has a living cellular structure, rather as a human has a living cellular structure that constitutes his body.
Is it a metal comparable to those we know on Earth? Or?
No, no.
Is it a metal which can be detected in any way in the spectrum of any of the planets from which it comes?
It may be, yes, possibly. There may be very, very great heat needed in the beginning to fuse more than one metal together to make this metal which they eventually settle on for the saucers.
Have you ever travelled in one of these vehicles?
Not in a physical body, but I'd like to point out that my mother has travelled in one of these vehicles in a physical body, and she went along to a meeting that was arranged, and she had to walk through mud in a field, and she got her shoes covered with mud. She walked up some steps and into a flying saucer.
Now, she's made a recording of her experience, which you played to me and from which we've selected an excerpt. I'd like just to tell the viewers for a moment, if I may, the point at which we've taken this excerpt, because they'll know then what they're listening to. This is a long recording, and we've only time for a very short portion of it. In it, one can hear Mrs. King, that's Mr. King's mother, describing the whole of her trip in a flying saucer. She describes how she enters it, how she meets the crew, how it takes off, how she flies inside this vehicle, and finds herself somewhere in space. She doesn't know where. The point at which we're going to play the recording is the point at which she is describing looking at some of the instruments inside the saucer and what she sees when it is in flight and when she's inside it. Could we have the recording?
Certainly.
And in a few moments, one of the screens lighted up. I thought, oh, well, now I've got something to look at. And it was the strangest, most fantastic thing you've ever seen. Behind this screen seemed to be a round world moving slowly. It was going from west to east, but from east to west was a light working along this thing, this screen. I could see it was round because I could see the contour of it. Oh, I said, that's wonderful. I said, which I said, what is that? He said, that is your earth. Oh, I said, isn't it wonderful? I said, and what is that light? He said, that is our beam. We are flying over your earth.
Thank you very much. Now, you've heard your mother's first-hand account of this, apart from this recording.
Oh, I have indeed, yeah.
Tell me quite frankly, Mr. King, allowing for the fact that she's your mother and she knows your interest in these matters, do you think she's been led away to any extent by her enthusiasm, or do you think this actually has happened to her?
This actually did happen to my mother.
You're quite sure about it?
Yes, I'll stake my life on it.
Now, for one moment, there's another aspect of this that I'd like to ask you about. Apart from the scientific data which have interested you and which you have described briefly to us, the nature of the people, the way they live, the fact that they can travel in spaceships, incidentally, how long does it take them to get, for instance, from Saturn to the Earth?
I'm not sure, but from Venus to the Earth, if they're really pushed for time,
yes,
they can do the journey in 2.5 seconds.
2.5 seconds from Venus to the Earth?
Yeah.
You don't know how long it takes them from Saturn?
I'm not sure, no.
No. Well, now, in addition to the interest in this extraordinary information, they have messages that they feel must be transmitted through you. What are these messages about?
Well, they stress the dangers of atomic experimentation and also turn back to what they call the laws which are God, if we are to survive on this earth.
What kind of laws are they actually postulating?
Well, the laws as laid down by Jesus and Buddha, Krishna, and other great teachers who came to the earth to lead us throughout the ages.
So that their message has a strong religious content of a kind similar to that contained in the various religious teachings of the world.
Oh, yes, yes, definitely.
Now, do they make any original statements other than those which are already to be found in the established religions of the world?
Oh, yes, they do say, tell us about the certain dangers. For instance, they spoke about some time ago the large crack in the just beneath the surface of the Earth, which stretches for several 100 miles from the middle of Siberia right the way down through the center of Australia. And they say that if we opened up this fault line in the Earth's surface, we are liable to have tilt on the axis of the Earth as a result of this.
How might we open up this fault line?
Through atomic experimentation and so on.
And presumably if the fault line goes from Siberia to the middle of Australia, most of the Pacific Ocean would disappear into the fault.
Yes, and then you'd get the tremendous reaction between hundreds of millions of gallons of water and the shall we say, gases under pressure which are held in the center of the Earth.
Now, when you get visitations, physical visitations, you see the people and they talk to you in an ordinary voice in an ordinary way.
Oh, yes. The voice isn't quite ordinary, though. It has a certain peculiar quality which I can best describe as a quality of running water.
Now, when the messages come to you as in your capacity that you've described as mental channel number 1, you go into trance and the voice speaks through you. Is that right?
Yes, the intelligence speaks through me. In other words, I gain a telepathic rapport with the intelligence from another planet, and he conveys his message through me.
Using your vocal cords?
Yes, oh yes.
Could you do that this evening?
I think I could, yes.
Before I ask you to do it, there is one other question which I'd like to ask you, which I hope you will accept as completely sincere, but to be answered with equal sincerity. Many people are clearly going to draw the conclusion that you are sincerely but absolutely deluded in all you say, that this isn't true, that you believe it, and it is a sheer delusion. What is your own answer to that? How do you know that this is not, in fact, a projection of your own imagination?
Because I've met these people. My mother has met physically one of the people who has been speaking through me for a number of years. And he told my mother this fact, that he has been speaking virtually through me.
Now, who is going to speak through you this evening, if you can get in touch?
Intelligence from the planet Venus, who we call Aetherius.
Right. Will you now try to go into a trance for us?
I will try, yes.
Yes. Mr. King has explained to me that, in fact, it may take him 30 seconds, even perhaps as much as a minute, to get into a trance. And during this time, he has suggested that we should be entirely silent. And so we will be. We will wait for the voice if it comes through Mr. King.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My dear friend.
Your name is?
I am known as Aetherius.
Where do you come from?
The planet Venus.
Where are you speaking from now?
I am sorry, my dear friend, I cannot answer that question for you.
I had wondered simply whether you were in a vehicle of some kind, a spaceship described by Mr. King when he was talking to me, or whether you were in your normal abode. But you can't tell me that?
No.
You do travel, normally, in what Mr. King has described as flying saucers when you move about space, do you?
Yes, that is quite correct. We have indeed been visiting this Earth of yours for some 18 million of your Earth years.
And when you come here, what is your purpose in coming?
At the moment, Earth, as you call it, faces a certain situation. The situation can be described as a rather a dangerous one. You are liable to upset the balance of your Earth through number one, atomic experimentation, and number two, your deviation from the spiritual laws.
And your visits are designed to warn us against this?
Yes.
Can anybody see flying saucers when they arrive?
Oh, yes. The vehicles that you call flying saucers are quite physical. If you're fired a 16-inch shell at the hull of a flying saucer, it would burst when it came into contact with the force screen or protective barrier around the vessel.
Is there one single message that you would like to give us this evening? I'm afraid it must be brief. You'll understand that.
Yes. I would like to say this. If you are a Christian, then live the laws as laid down by Jesus. If you are a Buddhist, live the laws as laid down by Buddha. If you are a Hindu, then be the best Hindu. This procedure is the one true way for men of earth to save themselves from their lower aspects.
Thank you, Aetherius, very much indeed.
Good night.
Good night. Dr. Dewhurst, you've heard both what Mr. King has to say, the information that he has produced, the recording that his mother made, the voice that he believes is that of Aetherius taking over his vocal cords. From the point of view of our discussion, there are clearly two aspects to this. There is the theosophical or religious aspect, the moral teachings, which may be largely borrowed from religions as we know them, and there is the scientific material or the scientific claims, the rate of travel of the spaceship, the construction of the spaceship, and so on. I imagine that it is with the latter that you'd care to deal.
Yes, I think I should make this clear right from the start. As you said, there are two aspects to what Mr. King has told us, what the voice of Aetherius has told us. One brings us messages, which are the messages which have been brought from time to time by the world's religious leaders to us, and clearly about these I've no more authority to speak than any others of us here, or indeed anyone else.
Now, he did mention that people lived on Saturn with physical bodies.
Now, this is the other point that I think we have to make clear before we can proceed usefully in this discussion. It's this, that as scientists we deal with a material world. We know that material behaves in certain ways, it obeys certain laws, and with our telescopes we can look far out into space, we can see distant galaxies, and we find that the material in these galaxies, there are the same kinds of elements present, the same atoms, they're behaving in precisely the same way as they behave in our laboratories on the surface of the Earth. Now, within these limits, I can tell you what, as astronomers, we know about surface conditions on Saturn and Mars and Venus.
Tell us that immediately.
If we are to think of beings at all like ourselves on the surface of Saturn, then quite frankly this is impossible.
Yes.
We don't claim as astronomers to know all the answers. Indeed, we're, I think, perhaps more aware than many people are of how little we really know about the nature of the material
about
world.
Saturn in the time we've got.
What we do know is that the surface temperature on Saturn is something like 150 degrees centigrade below freezing point.
Yes.
Now, already vital processes are beginning to slow down. For example, if you deep freeze food to about -10 degrees centigrade, then you prevent metabolic processes going on in quite low forms of life, microbes and so on.
Yes.
And we find it almost impossible to believe that any high form of living matter could exist at this temperature. In addition, all the high forms of life that we know on the surface of the Earth, mammals and so on, breathe or rely on oxygen for their existence. It's completely lacking in Saturn. The atmosphere is probably made very largely of hydrogen, and certainly there's a large quantity of methane, fire damp poisonous gas, but no oxygen containing atom molecules that we know.
The pressure of the gases as you approach the surface of the planet, what are they like?
Well, of course we can't give a certain answer to this because we can't see down to any solid surface below the cloud levels in Saturn, even if there is a solid surface. But we suppose that as the pressure increases as you go inwards, that the gases will begin to solidify, and you'll pass from a gaseous atmosphere down to perhaps solid hydrogen at the bottom. You'll pass through an intermediate phase where there is nothing that we know of as a simple surface between gas and solid at all.
So that in summary, the temperature's at least 15 times lower than that of a deep freeze. There's no oxygen of any kind, only ammonia, and most of the gases are a sort of liquid slush as they near whatever might be the surface of the planet.
This is the sort of picture that we have of Saturn, yes.
So it's impossible for you to conceive of life.
Quite impossible.
Now, the only other point I'd like you to answer is this question of both the construction and the speed of flying saucers. We are told that they're made of an organic metal. We are told that they can travel from Venus to the Earth in 2.5 seconds.
Well, here again, it seems to me that Mr. King and I are not speaking the same language. If the flying saucers, whatever these vehicles are made of material substance, then I can only speak of them if they're made of substances that are known to us as scientists. This phrase that Mr. King uses of organic metals is completely meaningless, but if it is a material substance, then it is quite impossible, within the limits of our knowledge, that he could possibly come from Venus to the Earth in, I think it was 2.5 seconds, Mr. King said. This is a velocity much greater than the velocity of light. And we've had very considerable success in explaining the behavior of the material universe on the assumption that this can't happen.
But no, the velocity of light is the limiting speed of the universe?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I wish we could go into this further, but I know we're running over time, and I think it's worth running over a bit just to get these things clear. Now, Tony, you know as well as I do that we don't have to take this material that Mr. King has said purely at its face value. Supposing that the refutation on the scientific aspect that has been given by our colleague is absolute, and that Mr. King is sincerely misguided or deluded about the nature of the scientific aspects of his claims, there is something about the symbolic aspects of them which perhaps you could comment on.
Yes, I think certainly, because you've got to assume if flying saucers have no real physical existence, and the people that he's talking about also have no real physical existence, you've got to assume that they are fantasies. That is, that they are things which originate within the mind itself, that he is imagining or conjuring up these creatures, and that they are attributed to the sky, to outer space, and this is indeed a familiar psychological mechanism which we know as projection. It is the basis of the tests such as the Rorschach test, where people look at ink blots. Now, there isn't anything in an ink blot, and therefore it's of interest psychologically, because anything you see in an ink blot must come out of you, out of your own mind.
As indeed it does.
As indeed it does. And in the same way, of course, the sky is a very suitable place in which to see things. You'll remember Hamlet and Polonius, and how Hamlet points out a cloud to Polonius and says it's backed like a weasel, or it's shaped like a whale, and so on. So that the sky is a particularly suitable place to receive projections from within the mind itself. You can see anything in the sky if you look hard enough, as it were. And that's the first point that I want to make. The second is, of course, that there is evidence of a widespread tendency in human beings to see things in the sky. Jung, in his recent book, Professor Jung of Zurich, in his recent book on flying saucers, gives examples and indeed pictures of things seen in the sky, not unlike flying saucers, in the 16th century, in Bâle and Nuremberg and other places.
People have been seeing things like this and claiming to see them throughout history. We've got time for one more observation. I'd like you to give your view, and Jung's, about why people are seeing flying saucers now.
Well, he regards us as being in a state of, the world as being in a state of being divided into two armed camps, as it were. It's natural that we should all be suffering anxiety. We all live under the threat of destruction. What is more natural than that people should look up to the sky, as they always have done, looking for hope of some kind, looking for a symbolic solution, and they see a saucer, they see a circular shape, they see something which has always been of the nature of a peaceful, reconciling, hopeful completion. The circle is the only perfect figure. It stands for this.
This goes indeed with the advice that Mr. King believes he gets given.
Exactly. It's a phenomenon which is repeated throughout history, and many examples can be given of it.
We would have liked to have discussed this longer. We are limited strictly now by time. I think that perhaps there is one important point about this that we need to take away with us. Mr. King's claims scientifically cannot be accepted by an astronomer who has told us that astronomers cannot fit his claims in with the facts of the universe as they know them, nor have they ever seen, despite their telescopes and their interest, a flying saucer in the sky. They've been seen by people who are not astronomers, like Mr. King. You've heard also that the kind of advice, the kind of claims and the kind of messages that are transmitted fall in with the kind of hopes and fears that divide mankind. It would be easy, foolish, I think, to deride Mr. King, who, if nothing else, is absolutely sincere. Because what Mr. King is really doing, perhaps through what may well be total delusion, is nevertheless uttering in one way, in a symbolic form, the cry of anxiety that divides our world, that our scientific interest has outrun our wisdom and our humanity in some respects, and we're afraid that it may outrun our existence. We therefore may not agree with what Mr. King claims or says. We may think that he is sincere but deluded. But we shall delude ourselves if we think that there is no significance in these fears and their expression in this form. Good night.
Rent a car, can't keep them. The manufacturers won't take them. The 94 rental fleets must be sold at any cost. Buzz's Car Sales Giant Summer Fleet Closeout is now through Labor Day. Fleet prices are posted on hundreds of cars and trucks. Fleet financing is authorized. 4.9%, no money down. Buzz's Car Sales Giant Summer Fleet Closeout ends Labor Day. And so does 4.9% financing with no money down.
Our next witness is going to be Paul Heroux from McGill University. And again, you have 5 minutes, sir.
I want to tackle the subject of insurance. You know that neither Lloyd's of London nor Swiss Re will underwrite liability policies for electromagnetic radiation because they think the health risk is too great. In other words, they believe that when the lawyers get involved, and I know many of them, the companies who deliver this radiation to the public could be wiped out. By combining 5G and self-driving cars equipped with radar, you would create an exceptional opportunity for a class action lawsuit against both telcos and the car industry. I don't know how you can support the deployment of 5G, a new cellular system that will seriously enhance human exposure to electromagnetic radiation, when you know what Dr. Goldberg just told you. And you know that the modulation that is introduced by 5G is a new threat on biological systems. We used to have frequency domain multiple access, time domain multiple access, code domain multiple access, and now we have 5G beamforming, all data compaction strategies that maximize the biological impact of this radiation. In other words, it's going to get a lot worse with this deployment. You know that all human cancers, and I use cancer as the, so to speak, the example here, although there's many other health effects of this radiation, because it's the most closely documented, because we have a long history, bad history with cancer. All human cancer, leukemia, colon, breast cancer, lung cancer, respond to electromagnetic radiation at levels hundreds of times below the FCC recommendations. By the way, the FCC have zero medical and biological expertise. They take their marching orders from the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. And while this institution was setting the standards, I was present And I know how lightheartedly they suppressed any information that would impair the development of their applications. They just didn't want to hear about it. So it was never considered. How can you allow this when the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the foremost authority on human cancers, warned you twice in 2002 and in 2012 about the link between electromagnetic radiation and cancer in humans? The environment has to be cleaned up of electromagnetic radiation progressively, not augmented in radiation. Electromagnetic radiation has repeatedly been linked with cancer in animals. Chu, in 1992, reported with 200 rats a multiplication by 4 of primary malignancies in animals exposed. Ripaccioli, in 1997, reported with 200 rats enhancements of lymphomas by a factor of 2.4 in mice exposed to EMR. This year, the National Toxicology Program is reporting strong evidence of similar results with 1,440 rats and 1,680 mice. Finally, also this year, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy is confirming the NTP results using 2,448 male and female rats. So I urge you, don't listen to me. Listen to the advice of 4,288 rats and 1,680 mice that were put in a carefully controlled situation and are telling you that cancer for only one disease is enhanced by this radiation. Diabetes is 25% of your health budget. If electromagnetic radiation enhances this even a little bit, look at the cost that it entails. These rats were not biased. They couldn't be. They developed tumors as a result of the radiation to the best that science can determine. And there is a group of people that are hypersensitive to these fields confirming that the effect is real, and these people have genetic variations that we understand are linked to the electromagnetic radiation. What America needed a long time ago was a chicken in every pot. Now what America needs is a fiber, an optical fiber in every home. The data has to come true, but wireless radiation is unfortunately a bad idea.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux. And if you would briefly, what are your credentials with McGill University?
I am at the Faculty of Medicine. I am the director of the Occupational Health Program within the Department of Epidemiology, Biostatistics, and Occupational Health.
Okay, thank you. Representative Deanne, did you have a question of this testifier? Okay. Representative Elder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, and thank you for your testimony today. Just to let you know, some of us are Truman Democrats. We still think there should be a chicken in every pot. At the beginning of your testimony, you indicated concern that implementation of this technology will cause liability to the auto industry.
Yes.
Are you aware that both the General Motors Corporation and the Ford Motor Company are in support of this bill because they feel it's necessary for their autonomous vehicle future?
Look, historically, industry does not have a good record of making good choices. GM's original view on car crash safety was that cars don't cause accidents, drivers do. American industry had to follow the lead of Volvo in Sweden before it included collapsible steering columns that reduced the death rate by 12%, airbags that reduced the death rate by 25%, and safety bags that reduced the death rate by 42%, crumple zones and other devices in cars. Remember these heavy cars with big bumpers that were full of chrome everywhere, you know, that were killing machines rather than meant to be used by humans. And another example is that as a result of GM's policy of supporting the inclusion of tetraethyl lead in gasoline instead of ethanol, many decades ago, 15 million US children lost 10 IQ points and had permanent problems with hyperactivity, behavior, and learning. So don't tell me that we have to follow the recommendations of the captains of industry, because I worked in industry for more than a decade, and I love these people, but their focus is so great on what they're doing. They want to serve, but their focus is incredibly directed to their task. They have no knowledge of health effects of their works, and this creates a schism within society that we have to bridge. And unfortunately, this may fall upon you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Representative DeAnda, do you know?
I'll wait till the next one, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, do you want Mr. O'Rourke to come back?
Yeah, I would appreciate it.
Representative DeAnda, have a question of Mr. O'Rourke.
Pregnancy is a time of great excitement when women take a great deal of care about what they eat and what they do. It's a wonderful period of time that's over faster than you can imagine. The exposures can take place from all sorts of things, and we can't put pregnant women in bubbles. We don't want to. But we want to make sure that they make healthy babies when and if they choose to do so. Now, having worked at the National Academy of Sciences for 10 years and worked with some of the top scientists in the world, I thought there could be no problem with cell phones, because if there were, I would know about it and so would all my colleagues. Well, what I found out was that I was completely wrong. We worked on passive smoke. We worked on asbestos. And in each one of these things, what we saw was an epidemic in slow motion. We knew that tobacco caused cancer in the 1930s. We have known the dangers of asbestos also for more than 100 years. And yet the arguments went on and on and on. Show me the proof. And the answer is, you show me the money.
When a baby's born, there are 100 billion neurons, or nerve cells, in the body. Many of them are competing for connections. All of those cells are bridging connections, even in the first few months of pregnancy. And disruption of those earliest signals can have serious implications for later life. Nerve cell connections that shouldn't be there may stay. Nerve cell signals may be disrupted. The wrong signal may get sent to the wrong neuron. And as a result, there may be permanent changes in how the wiring of our brain is left. How those nerve cell connections finalize is critical for many aspects of our function as human beings on this earth.
Really have to start asking, what about all this wireless radiation that I'm surrounded with? You don't get to control a lot of it in public places, but in your own home, in your own space, in your own workplace, you really do have the right to control what you're exposed to. You've got cordless phones, you've got cell phones, you've got tablets, you have Wi-Fi monitors, and you may have baby monitors. And all of them are emitting wireless radiation. And the total effect of all of these things is something that we have never examined.
The fetus is perhaps the most vulnerable to these types of insults. When the brain is just forming, we are perhaps at our most vulnerable stage. So this is a study that really looked at only the effect of prenatal exposure to cell phone radiation. What effect does having a cell phone near your baby when you're pregnant have on that baby later on in life when that baby's grown up? We tested these mice when they reached adulthood and looked at the lasting effect of that early prenatal cell phone exposure. The mice who were exposed to cell phones were more hyperactive. They were running around the cage a lot more aggressively. They had poorer memory. They couldn't remember objects in the cage as well as their counterparts who weren't exposed to the cell phone radiation. But they did not have any increased anxiety, as sometimes running around can be a sign of anxiety. It was not that. They were calm and relaxed. So they were running around these cages, bouncing off the walls, not a care in the world. Something that, in our eyes, resembles attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children. That was the closest model we can think of to the behavioral effects that we saw in the mice.
When I first saw Hugh Taylor's study, I was thrilled and really deeply concerned, because I was aware of research earlier looking at what happens inside the brain. And if you look at something called the dentate gyrus, which occurs here and is quite critical to where brain cells form for thinking and learning, you can see that prenatally exposed rats develop smaller brains with more brain damage.
The brain is tremendously resilient, but when there's so many environmental insults at once, the circuitry in the brain becomes overwhelmed. And unlike what we have in our electrical wiring in homes, where there's a circuit breaker that can stop the electrical flow before it causes damage, the brain doesn't have that same capacity. And so environmental insults, when they add up, the circuitry is especially vulnerable.
We have some human evidence now where a few studies have followed women with exposures to electromagnetic fields, and they have seen that their children who were exposed to more electromagnetic radiation tend to have more learning disabilities and more problems in school.
Mothers who spent a lot of time on the cell phone, carried a cell phone with them during their pregnancies, had a higher risk of having children with behavioral problems. And I think when you have clear cause and effect relationship in mice, and an association in women, that women who use these cell phones had children with more behavioral problems, I think that's together very powerful evidence saying that this is truly a cause and effect in humans as well. The mouse studies prove that it's really causative, that the cell phones are causing it. It's not just because of some other behaviors linked to cell phones in women.
Children are often the recipient of environmental insults and suffer the consequences, yet they can't weigh in the same way as the organizations, the industries that produce these environmental insults. And so that's why it's terribly important for researchers, scientists, and the public at large to advocate for being proactive and preventing hazardous exposures before they occur.
You know, it may be that humans and mice are different, and the effect might be somewhat different in humans than mice, but at this point I wouldn't take any chances. There's essentially no downside to being cautious and protecting your baby.
Most pregnant women understand they should stay away from cigarette smoke, they should not drink alcohol, they should not drink coffee, they need to be careful about what they eat. They know that. But they aren't aware of the need to minimize their exposure to wireless radiation. We cannot afford to treat this generation as experiments in a subject with no controls.
My name is Chuck Groddens with Computer Care Clinic. And one of the most frequent questions we get here in our service is, how can I resolve my Wi-Fi troubleshooting problems? People lose signal or a device stops connecting. So I decided in order to answer that question with any authority, I needed to look a little bit further into this whole Wi-Fi thing. What is it? How does it work? What type of signals are being broadcast? Are they directional? How much power do you need? And then I thought about it as I was doing this research. Well, what are the effects of these things, these Wi-Fi transmitters? What type of radio frequencies do they use? How much power do they need? And Where are they, and how are they affecting us, if in any way at all? So this video is going to be a little bit longer than our usual tip of the day, but it's going to explore Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi signals, and we'll dig into a little bit of radio frequency too, just in case you forgot or you were sleeping during your physics classes in high school. So let's dig into Wi-Fi, find out the myths and the truths, and hopefully we'll have a better idea and handle on how to troubleshoot our Wi-Fi problems.
Let's first look at an oversimplified view of the electromagnetic field, or EMF radiation spectrum. EMF radiation can be classified from very low frequency, which has a long wavelength, to very high frequency, which has a short wavelength. The sound waves humans can hear are a form of very low frequency EMF radiation, with one single electromagnetic wave cycle or wavelength longer than a football field. On the high frequency end, you can find things like X-rays and gamma rays with a wavelength smaller than an atom. Radio waves and microwaves are forms of electromagnetic energy that are collectively described by the term radio frequency, or RF. RF emissions are discussed in terms of energy, radiation, or fields. Radiation is defined as energy traveling through the air in form of waves or particles. Electromagnetic radiation can be described as waves of electric and magnetic energy moving together or radiating through space. These radiation waves are generated by the movement of electrical charges through a conductive metal object, like an antenna. For example, the movement of energy in a radio or television or cellular base station antenna generates electromagnetic waves that radiate away from the antenna and are eventually intercepted by a receiving antenna, such as your rooftop TV antenna, a car radio antenna, or an antenna integrated into a handheld device, such as a cellular telephone. Frequency is the number of electromagnetic waves passing any given point in 1 second. For example, a typical radio wave transmitted by your favorite FM radio station has a wavelength of about 10 feet or 3 meters and a frequency of about 100 million cycles or waves per second, known as 100 megahertz. So your favorite FM radio station sends about 100 million 10-foot-long RF electromagnetic waves into the air every second. That's a lot of waves. Telecommunication services cannot exist without EMF. Microwave ovens, commercial heating, manufacturing, diagnostic medical services, some medical techniques, and radar are also uses of RF energy. There's also natural RF produced by Earth and space. So we're surrounded by radiation. EMF radiation is classified as non-ionizing or ionizing. Ionizing EMF radiation, like certain UV rays and X-rays, can break chemical bonds, which is not great. That means they can cause cell damage in living things, which is obviously bad for us. RF radiation, as found in radio, TV, cell phone, and Wi-Fi transmissions, is considered non-ionizing. Some sort of EMF radiation is emitted by all technical equipment or devices that produce electromagnetic fields. It's basically anything that gets plugged in or runs on a battery. Power lines, radar systems, communication towers, cell phones, cordless phones, Wi-Fi routers, iPads, TVs, computers, gaming consoles. They all produce some sort of EMF radiation. Well, here's where it gets interesting. All EMF radiation has an effect on the human body. But the question is whether it's a negligible effect or a negative effect, and to what degree. Microwaves are a specific category of radio waves. They can be defined as radio frequency radiation with frequencies from several hundred megahertz to several gigahertz, or thousands of megahertz. One of the most familiar and widespread uses of microwave energy is found in household microwave ovens, which operate at a frequency of about 2,450 megahertz, or 2.45 gigahertz. Sound familiar? That's right. Almost the same frequency your microwave oven uses to heat your food is also used for most cordless phones and Wi-Fi routers. Technically, Wi-Fi channels typically range from 2.412 gigahertz to about 2.472 gigahertz, right in that spectrum. So you might think, aha, that's where my Wi-Fi interference is coming from, my microwave oven. But not so fast. Most microwave ovens are well shielded and will not emit enough radiation to interfere with wireless communications even when they're on. If your microwave is, say, very old or was dropped or damaged in a move, it might have a damaged shield. To be safe, it's probably a good idea to replace it. If you have doubts about your wireless equipment and interference, you could upgrade that wireless networking equipment and your cordless phone devices to the newer 5 GHz band, which is way above the 2.4, as long as your wireless devices all support it. Research continues on the possible effects of exposure to RF and microwave radiation. 2.4 gigahertz, as we learned, is far from ionizing radiation, the type that can quickly harm human tissue and cause bad things like cancer. But you can't see or feel any radiation. And what's scary is the long-term effects of exposure to radiation might not appear for several months or even years. It's widely thought the principal effect of non-ionizing radiation, like microwaves, is an increase in the temperature of water in our bodies. Theoretically, it would take an unlikely amount of microwave energy to cause harm to a human body. But as scientists are beginning to study the effects more closely, some people are beginning to change their minds. In 2011, the WHO International Agency for Research on Cancer classified radio frequency electromagnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic to humans, based on an increased risk for glioma, a malignant type of brain cancer associated with wireless phone use. You probably heard about that in the news. Also, 2 areas of the body, the eyes and the testes, are known to be particularly vulnerable to heating by RF energy because of the relative lack of available blood flow to dissipate the excessive heat. Laboratory experiments have shown that 30 minutes to 1 hour of considerably high levels of RF radiation, now we're talking 100 to 200 milliwatts per centimeter squared, which is a tremendous amount of energy, can cause cataracts in rabbits. Temporary sterility caused by such effects as changes in sperm count and in sperm mobility is possible after exposures of the testes to high-level RF radiation. So if you're thinking about having children, fellows, you might want to remove that cell phone from your front pocket. The good news is that typical environmental levels of RF energy routinely encountered by the general public are far below levels necessary to produce significant heating and increased body temperature. But there may be situations, particularly workplace environments near high-powered RF sources, where recommended limits for safe exposure of human beings to RF energy could be exceeded. More recently, other scientific laboratories in North America, Europe, and elsewhere have reported certain biological effects after exposure of animals and animal tissue to relatively low levels of RF radiation. These reported effects have included certain changes in the immune system, neurological effects, behavioral effects, evidence for a link between microwave exposure and the action of certain drugs and compounds, an effect in brain tissue, and effects on DNA. Some studies have also examined the possibility of a link between RF and microwave exposure and cancer. Results to date have been inconclusive. Microwave exposure, when you think about it, is fairly new, but it's growing quickly. Dr. Magda Havas makes some great points regarding our lack of experience with the effects of non-ionizing radiation since it's relatively recent. Cell phones have been around for nearly 30 years, but only becoming widespread in the last 10 since smartphones took off. Wi-Fi has been a thing for nearly 15 years now, growing slowly, but now it's everywhere. And smart meters installed by your local electric company have been transmitting pulses of pretty concerning power for about 5 years, causing a lot of people to take notice. It takes quite a while to formulate a statistically significant health finding, and up to now, there's not a whole lot of evidence or research. Also, Dr. Magdas notes that human exposure to radiation used to be intermittent, but now it's more constant than ever. Wi-Fi routers emit a beacon signal that is continuous as long as the device is powered on. In other words, you don't have to be connected to the internet to be exposed to the radiation generated by a wireless router. When information is either uploaded or downloaded, the radiation levels increase both at the router and at the computer. The same is true for cordless phones and wireless baby monitors. Voice-activated baby monitors and cordless phones that radiate only when in use are available in Europe, but not currently available widely in North America. Now, some people are more sensitive to EMF than others, suffering from a recently discovered affliction known as electronic hypersensitivity. They used to just think these people are crazy, but now they're finding that symptoms including unexplained fatigue, sleep disturbances, headaches, feeling of discomfort, difficulty concentrating, depression, memory loss, visual disruptions, irritability, hearing disruptions, ringing in the ears, skin problems, heart palpitations, and irregular heartbeat, dizziness, loss of appetite, movement difficulties, and nausea may all be symptoms of electronic hypersensitivity. When electrically hypersensitive people go into an electromagnetically clean environment, many of their symptoms seem to diminish or disappear. Studies predict by 2017, almost 50% of the population may be complaining of this illness. Some countries are already withdrawing Wi-Fi from public areas and even creating radiation-free refuges for people with electrosensitivity. The bottom line on RF radiation and its effect on us, well, the jury is still out, but it's not looking great. In the meantime, until we all know for sure, it might be prudent to take a few precautionary steps. Fortunately, it's pretty easy to avoid most microwave radiation in high doses. Move wireless routers and cell phones further away from people. The further they are away, the less RF you'll absorb. Use headphones or the speakerphone when you talk on your phone to keep it away from your brain. Don't sleep with your cell phone under your pillow. Don't put your cell phone in your pockets. And turn things off when you're not using them. Unplug your Wi-Fi router and turn off your phone if you absolutely don't need it at night. So what levels of RF radiation are considered safe, and what kinds of levels are typical? We did some of our own testing with an X-Tech 480836 EMF meter in a typical home and office scenario, and here's what we found.
So we took some readings at our store and at our home. First, we started at our store. Sorry for the messy workshop back here. And we got close to the wireless router and found that we had some spikes up to 0.6 microwatts per cubic centimeter, which is pretty high. So the question is, we still don't know what this stuff is doing to us, but there's some pretty cool charts at bioinitiative.org citing scientific studies that have already happened, and they have lots of easy-to-read, colorful charts with the potential effects of electromagnetic radiation in the human body. Again, these are proven to be long-term studies. Stuff's still kind of new. This is interesting, too. If you look at these smart meters that everybody's fussing about, I didn't think it was such a big deal until I took the readings myself, and looking at a peak of 37.28. And that's pretty heavy. I mean, that's a lot of power. Now, it's pulsed energy. It's not constant. But this might be hitting you in your bedroom or your place of work, depending on the location of this thing. And, of course, I'm right on top of it here. But if you look at it, you get immune system effects at that type of radiation. So you need to be concerned, if nothing else. We don't know if it's causing any cancer or immune system effects with a pulsed rate like that. Your body does a really good job of healing itself. Also, the microwave ovens. If you get really close, nobody would do this, would stand in front of a microwave oven, but there's considerable amount of energy coming out of a microwave oven. And you're looking at some of the effects that could here, including altered cell membranes. Of course, you wouldn't stand in front of a microwave oven. Most people have more sense than that. Although there is shielding inside, if you get right up on it, there are still some waves, microwaves, that do escape that shielding. So you want to make sure you're backed out. And you see, if I pull away and even leave the room, it gets back to more of a background radiation. Again, this is in our store. We've got Wi-Fi waves and microwaves flying all over the place in here. Now, this is just my laptop, and you can see as it's sending and receiving information, it's jacked up to about 0.2, 0.3, and you can see that there are some possible neurological effects, and that's constant. That's what we're probably doing sitting at our desks every day or at home, and even having these laptops on our laps, for the gentlemen especially, it could affect sterility. So if you're having a problem having kids, you might want to double check your electronic devices. Now, my wife was on a phone call, and look at this, spiking at 7 microwatts per cubic centimeter. And it's huge. I mean, it doesn't do it all the time. We have a pretty crappy signal. We have Verizon in our house, and unfortunately, we're a little far off the beaten path. So I understand the further are you away, the more energy your phone has to use to acquire that signal. As I pull this away from her cell phone while she's on an active call, and this doesn't happen all the time, just when you're on a telephone call, and it's a little less for Wi-Fi, you can see that it gets kind of jacked up periodically. Not all the time, but I mean, these are significant numbers here, this 3 and 4, and you can see on the chart here what this does, even up to 7. And again, this is more constant than the pulsed energy we're looking at.
So if you spend a lot of time on the phone, you might have some questions about what is this stuff doing? It's a relatively new phenomenon, only the last decade or so, so we don't have a whole lot of information. We are the guinea pigs, my friends, so take some precautions and just be careful. It's better to be safe than be sorry. My name is Chuck Fresh. Please like and subscribe and tell your friends about this video too. Hey, we might all learn something if we put our heads together, and put your findings in the comments below, please.
Ready? Go. Hey everybody, Rex Bear League Project. This is the EMF radiation. This is an EMF tester. I'm out here by a couple of cell towers, a bunch of houses, and an electrical grid. And what this is doing is every time the alarm goes off, that's showing the danger levels. You can see there's a daycare, or a school right across the street from this huge electrical grid. It's, what's it showing? Okay, so 1.7, what this is showing is 1.7 UT is considered to be 170 times this what's considered safe. 170 times, it should be 0.1. 0.1 is what is considered safe, 0.1. So if you're at 1.0, that's 100 times what's considered safe. When it goes off like that and it beeps like that, that is considered abnormal levels. Just a minute ago, it hit 15, so that's 1,500 times what it should be. You getting that? There's a bunch of houses around here. This is a residential neighborhood, and this is what you're exposed to, ladies and gentlemen. This is it right here. Make sure you don't get any of the, like the license plates or anything like that. So I'm going to turn around right here, and we're going to drive past it one more time. .1. That's what it's supposed to be at. No more than 0.1. Not in the USA though. They love us out here. They like to put genetically modified E. coli feces in our drinks and our beverages. They like to put formaldehyde in vaccines. Of course they don't mind. Imagine being a house right next to this place. I wonder what these guys' lifespan is. Right next door to this place. You don't even know it. It's probably higher in these people's houses because they've got additional Wi-Fi. Somebody said, oh, it's not constant, so it's okay. Really? This isn't consistent? You're saying that this is okay, this is safe, not a big deal. 0.1 is enough to tear your DNA strands, according to the research that I have done. 0.1 is enough to help cause things such as leukemia, brain tumors, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. And that's not even 5G, folks. Now, yes, 5G is a highly concentrated beam of frequencies. It's also going to be directed towards certain locations. What happens when you walk past that? Is that not going to affect you? Somebody said, oh, you know, it's no big deal because it just happens every once in a while. Well, imagine if somebody just walked up to you every once in a while and punched you in the face. Would that be big of a deal? Would that be okay? Not that big of a deal, right?
Dr. Goldbeck, no more than 5 minutes.
Okay, hello, good morning. My name is Dr. Angie Kolbeck, and I'm here today to oppose SB 637 due to adverse health impacts from wireless radiation, including but not limited to cancer and DNA damage. My background is that I practiced as a board-certified pediatrician, and I also studied hospital and molecular epidemiology at U of M School of Public Health. I've been reviewing the studies showing the impacts of wireless radiation on our health, and there are now thousands of studies showing the following adverse health impacts to wireless radiation: cancer, oxidative damage, DNA failure, cardiac arrhythmias, and other effects on the heart muscle, as well as blood pressure and vascular effects. ADHD is skyrocketing, behavioral disorders, and learning difficulties, sleep disturbances and memory loss, changes involving the blood-brain barrier and effects on neuron firing rates in the EEGs, disrupted immune function and change in stress proteins, reproductive and fertility effects. I encourage you to look at the website bioinitiative.org. These impacts are well documented in over 3,600 papers. In addition, a large $25 million study conducted by the FDA also reveals that wireless radiation causes cancer and DNA damage. With all of this in mind, we should not be pursuing policies that would expose our families, our friends, and our communities to an increase in wireless radiation. 5G technology greatly increases our exposure to wireless radiation. Some analyses of 5G networks have concluded that transmitters will be required every 2 to 10 houses. Ask yourself this: how many people out there would choose to move next to a cell tower emitting wireless radiation if you had a choice? Well, if SB 637 goes through, they will put the transmitters wherever they want, approximately every 2 to 10 houses, and you will have no choice. And the amount of wireless radiation you will be exposed to will be greatly increased. From a medical perspective, this will be disastrous. You may be asking yourself, why isn't the federal government protecting us from this? Unfortunately, it's the FCC that sets what a safe level of radiation exposure is, not the FDA or the CDC. In many cases, the FCC chairman has no health background and has strong ties with the telecom industry, as is the case with this current FCC chair, who is a lawyer for Verizon. They either have jobs with the telecoms before or after they're done being FCC chair, they go ahead and they get their high-paying jobs with the telecoms after. This has led to looking out for the telecom industry, not the health care of our communities. In fact, the allowed level of wireless radiation exposure in the U.S. is substantially higher than is allowed in other countries. Having the FCC chair be in charge of what a safe wireless radiation level is very much like having a tobacco company decide how many packs of cigarettes it's safe to smoke each day. So now you have a choice before you. The data is solid, showing adverse health impacts from wireless radiation. Thousands upon thousands of studies, independent from telecom-funded studies, have been done showing the proof. We can still pursue high tech, but pursue it in a way that will not harm our families, our friends, and our communities. Please vote no on SB 637. Thank you.
Ms. Kolbeck, again, your credentials are?
I'm a physician, and I also studied hospital and molecular epidemiology at University of Michigan School of Public Health.
Okay, Representative Riley has a question.
I just had a question about the FDA study. So is this a fairly recent study, and what are the findings from that, and are those findings refuted at all?
Yes. Well, actually, there's 3,600 studies showing the same thing. But in addition to that, they had a large 14-year study, $25 million study, and the NTP study. And within the paper we gave everybody, and as a matter of fact, every Michigan representative and senator has this paper. If you look towards the boxed section, you'll see the findings. If it's on page, let's see here. It's on page 10, the findings of these studies. The boxed and directly underneath the box study.
Are those,
and this is just a recent, I mean, this is.
Are those results you can briefly summarize?
Sure. Okay. Well, it causes cancer and DNA damage. That's the final thing. The study confirmed that wireless radiation indeed causes cancer and DNA damage at non-thermal levels, below the FCC safety limits, which deny non-thermal effects. Dr. Ron Melnick, PhD, senior toxicologist and director of special programs in the NIEHS, who led the study until he retired, said, the NTP tested the hypothesis that cell phone radiation could not cause health effects, and that hypothesis has now been disproved. The experiment has been done, and after extensive reviews, the consensus is that there was a carcinogenic effect. In regards to DNA damage, he said that the results of the study should put to the rest the old argument that RF radiation cannot cause DNA damage. The scientist in the press conference in 2016 said that the public must be warned.
And that study is from whom?
This is from the NTP study. It's a large $25 million, 14-year study, extensive federal study.
NTP is what?
NTP, National Toxicology Program, right?
Okay.
But by the FDA, sponsored by and conducted by the FDA.
Okay, thank you.
And the FDA and the EPA and the CDC, those should be the people that are in charge of determining what safe levels we should be exposed to with radiation. It should not be a person that was a lawyer on Verizon's and has no health care, nothing. They know nothing.
Thank you for your testimony.